All thanks to double banners, we can safely say that the days of bad weapon banners are probably behind us. It's still possible that we can get some bad weapon banners, but it's a lot more unlikely than it used to be. If what we're looking for is the weapon banner that makes you scream to the sky, why is there no god, then we're definitely going to be looking at version 1.0 to 1.6. Now, unlike many of the standard 5-stars, some of the standard 4-star weapons still remain to be some of the best 4-star weapons and overall weapon choices for many characters to this day. You know, stuff like the Favonia's weapons and things like Widsith. Now, while some of the standard 5-stars are pretty damn good and some of them still remain to be, you know, pseudo best in slots for a lot of characters or just generic good options, they were for the most part swimming in a sea of garbage. Now, what qualifies as a bad weapon banner? What qualifies as bad weapons? For example, is Song of Broken Pines a bad weapon because it can only be well utilized on 2 characters, Razor and Eula? You could say yes, and if you're talking from a value standpoint, I think there is an argument to be made there that it is a bad value weapon because if you ever choose to stop playing those 2 characters, you basically have a dead weapon on your account. Or a weapon like Aquila Favonia that has technically been its best in slot from a damage increasing perspective, even though it has a more general use competition with Skyward Blade and even a cheap 4-star option in the Alley Flash. Technically, 4 stars can be kind of hard to get sometimes. And for you physical DPS gene lovers out there or the people who just like matching signature weapons to characters, no, that doesn't make Aquila Favonia good. It's not a weapon I would ever recommend anyone to roll for on purpose. Now let's talk about the weapons that only hurt a weapon banner's viability as a potential investment, you know, kind of like how when you put Barbara and Noelle on the same banner, except when it's with Yelan. In that case, they probably knew that Yelan was going to sell well no matter what, and it didn't matter what crappy 4-stars they put in that banner, but normally that would have been quite the deterrent. To begin with, we have the Bell, the champion of the memers and dreamers, the weapon that everyone always brings up every time any Claymore character comes out. They're like, is this when the Bell's going to actually be good? No, the Bell is doomed to suck forever. It's an HP scaling sword, fine. We can always get HP scaling Claymores, but the secondary effect is pure garbage. Bottom line, the Bell is one of the worst weapons you can see on a weapon banner, and if it sucks. You know what? No, this is going to take way too long if I go through every weapon. Let's just look at some bad banners and then, you know, pick one in the end. The very first weapon banner ever, and boy, what a strong start. Aquila Favonia is pretty terrible, obviously. Like I said with Bennett, it has an use. Ammo's Bow can be good for Ganyu, not really anybody else unless you're just using it as a stat stick. The tough thing here is that if you judge it for the time it was released in, Ganyu didn't exist yet, so Ammo's Bow is still terrible at this point. And if you judge this banner to nowadays standards of the characters we have, this banner is even more terrible because there's so many alternatives for Ganyu outside of the Ammo's Bow. And while this banner has the Bell, arguably one of the worst weapons in the game, and the Flute, a not very useful weapon, but not completely terrible, it is a respectable free-to-play option for if you're looking for a sword DPS, which there are very few of. On the other hand, it has Stringless, Favlance, and Widsith, 3 amazing weapons that are still best in slots on many characters today. Man, looking at these old banners is rough. Can you even imagine releasing something like this nowadays? Thankfully, because of double banners, we don't have to deal with something like this. You know, we got Memory of Dust, which for like the 30 Ningguang mains out there, you might have tried to get this. You might have got this accidentally, and you're probably making the best of a bad situation, but this is not a weapon I would recommend even a Ningguang main to roll for. The hope is that something better comes along someday, and the bar is set so very low. The Unforge gets a lot of unnecessary hate, especially before Dia was so kind to deliver Diluc a new signature weapon for him. The sword and the spear, however, are irredeemable pieces of garbage. The only reason the Claymore and the Catalyst even have a chance is because their competition is so bad. It's like bragging being the tallest adult in a room full of kindergartners. You just don't have competition. Skyward Harp, on the other hand, an actual good stat stick, just a good weapon to throw on most DPS, most supports, and it's gonna do its job. Put it on Sarah, who loves the high base attack and the crit stats because of her high burst damage, fantastic. The 4-stars here, on the other hand, not the greatest. Favlance is fantastic, but the other 4 really not doing much for this banner. Now I know I just spent a little bit of time actually defending the Unforged, but for the love of all that is good on God's green earth, do not roll for the Unforged on purpose. These are both weapons you would not want to get on purpose. Whether you're free to play deciding how to spend your very precious few primos, or God forbid you actually debate spending money on this, which in that case, like, go spend it on anything else. Hell, you'd probably be better off trying to invest in reopening Blockbuster again. The one saving grace of this banner is that the 4-stars are not the worst in the world, aside from, you know, the Bell. You got 4 decent and usable options here with 2 pretty good ones in the Dragon's Bane and the Phasbo. As good as the 4-stars could be, and these ones aren't amazing, but they're not bad, honestly, losing this the 75-25 on this banner would be better than getting either of these two weapons, which makes it a pretty risky banner and just a terrible banner overall. Then we have the Summit Shaper and Skyward Atlas banner, which these two weapons have something in common. Do you know what it is? Both of these weapons are one of the worst options in the respective series of weapons. Skyward Atlas may have its time to shine as a stat stick sometimes, but it's really just because of, again, really poor alternatives. One thing this banner does have going for it is the good lineup of 4-stars behind it. Sack Frags was amazing on Sucrose at the time. Stringless to this day is an amazing bow for many characters. Fav Sword, an amazing option, best in slot for several supports, and Fav's Lance, still the best in slot on numerous supports, one of the most sought after 4-stars of all time. This banner is a very polarizing one. Skyward Pride is not something you want to be wishing for purposefully. Amos Bow at the time was. Ganyu was very big back then. And Sack Sword is one of the most sought after 4-stars of all time. Everybody wants their Xingqiu to be as good as possible. We can definitely look at this banner now and say, yeah, this is pretty unappealing nowadays, and if it was released, people would be vomiting in protest. At the time, however, I don't think this one was quite as bad. Then let's skip a little bit ahead to 1.5, where we have, once again, two weapons in this god-awful series rerunning alongside what is very aggressively mediocre 4-stars. Now, the lithic weapons. These ones are a bit weird. It's pretty well known that these are very refinement-dependent weapons. They scale very well with refinements. But you also need to sometimes build your team worse than it would otherwise be built just for the sake of making the lithic weapons better. That can be a little bit of a problem. Okay, it can be a big problem. You can build an old school national team with Chongyun, Xiangling, Xingqiu, and Bennett, and you'll have 3 of the 4 stacks of lithic activated with 2 characters wielding the weapons. But it's not always necessarily better to use these, and it's also just, that's a lot just to make 2 weapons work. There's probably other variations with Yao Yao being a Dendro Liyue character now, and you know, we're about to have Baiju. So, like, there's options. But overall, I don't think lithic weapons are enough to save this, and if you count the lithic weapons as bad weapons, this banner is really bad. But it's worth noting, I don't consider the lithic weapons bad. I just think they're not really shining right now, or that, like, they're just not the best, but they are good, respectable options. But in any case, they don't save the 5-stars on this banner, nor the other mediocre 4-stars. Now jump way ahead again, all the way to version 2.4. At this point, both Ganyu and Amos Bow have started to fall off significantly, with people using alternatives and basically just replacing Ganyu with Ayaka entirely. Despite that, Amos Bow is still a respectable choice for a very viable character, Ganyu. Aside from Fav Sword and Dragon's Bane, the 4-stars on this banner just aren't that impressive, and overall leaving it to be a pretty mediocre banner in a pretty late version. One last big jump all the way to version 3.0, bringing us another train wreck banner with Amos Bow on it. Context is pretty important for this banner. Amos Bow was already falling off pretty considerably with every new bow that came out. Even in the case of the Hunter's Path, the bow that immediately preceded this banner. Then there's the Coconut Donut, also known as the Everlasting Moonglow, Kokomi's signature weapon. A 5-star signature weapon that is beaten by a 3-star, at least when you're playing her as a support, which is the most common way to play her. It's not really used by anyone else, and anyone that could potentially use it can also just use Thrilling Tales, which is an insane weapon for a 3-star. And the only 4-stars on this banner really worth talking about are Sack Sword and Dragon's Bane. Dragon's Bane saw a lot of extra value when Dendro got released because we just like EM stat sticks, and Sack Sword will always be valuable due to unit like Xingqiu wanting it as basically his best in slot weapon, not to mention Kazuha can use it too. Overall, for the version this was released in, I think this is a pretty bad banner, and like, it's definitely surrounded by some really good banners with really good weapons on it. Clearly, we have had some real steaming piles of garbage when it comes to weapon banners, and these banners may be part of the reason why the weapon banner has such a poor reputation. You know, aside from the fact that just characters are a little bit more exciting than weapons are in most cases. I think that, and I would wager to say that most of the community probably agrees. Whether or not you judge the banners I just talked about in the present, or with the knowledge that we have now and the characters we have now, they're pretty goddamn awful in both. So with that, of those banners, I think the absolute worst one that we had and will probably ever have to be the Vortex Vanquisher and Unforge banner. This thing is a heaping pile of shit. Your best case scenario from this banner would have been to lose your 25-75, get basically any standard weapon instead, and maybe get like 10 copies of the Favonia's bow, or even lose to other 4-stars that aren't even on the banner every second weapon. You know, ordinarily I post some kind of video related question here at the end. I'm more interested in starting a different kind of war in the comments here. To which I will say this: steak is the most overrated form of beef and possibly one of the most overrated foods on this planet. It's the diamonds of the food world. It is needlessly expensive for the value it offers over alternatives. Steak lovers are like a cult. They don't care as long as everyone says steak is amazing, and they don't care what it is, how expensive it is, how mediocre it is. As long as it's not well done, they do not care. And God forbid you mention well done steak around a steak cultist. For God's sakes, you could literally have the entire history of the modern world recounted to you in the same time it takes for them to explain how cooking your steak well done cooks the flavor out of it, ruins the texture, it ruins the steak, you're ruining the meat. And here's the silver lining though: while they're berating you with their psychotic steak rant that they've probably have memorized at this point because they've said it to so many people, you're probably enjoying a meal that cost a third of what theirs cost, and in the time they're doing their psychotic rant, their meal probably walked away. So thank you to my members and my patrons. Thank you for watching this video. I'll see you in the next one. Steak sucks. Bye.
Attaboy!